The dust-laden wind howled through the Montana territory like a vengeful spirit as Katherine Andrews clutched her meager belongings to her chest, the stagecoach that had carried her to Concordia disappearing into the distance. It was 1876, and the promise of a new life had brought her 2,000 miles from Boston to this desolate frontier town. Her legs trembled beneath her travel-worn skirts, not from fear of the unknown future that awaited her, but from the gnawing hunger that had been her constant companion for the past 3 days. The journey west had taken longer than expected. Delays, a robbery that claimed most of her money, and Katherine's stubborn pride in refusing to beg had left her surviving on nothing but water and a few stale biscuits since crossing into Montana. Now, as she stood at the edge of Concordia, her vision blurred, the world tilting precariously around her. "Madam," a deep voice called out. "Madam, are you the Easterner we've been expecting?" Katherine tried to focus on the tall figure approaching from the direction of the general store, but darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, her knees buckled beneath her, and the last thing she remembered was the sensation of falling into an endless void. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The softness of a pillow beneath her head, the warmth of a blanket tucked around her shoulders, the savory aroma of something cooking nearby. Katherine's eyelids fluttered open to find herself in a modest but clean cabin, lying on a bed that wasn't her own. "Careful now," said the same deep voice she'd heard before she collapsed. "You've been out cold for nearly 2 hours." Katherine turned her head to see a man kneeling beside a small fireplace, stirring something in an iron pot. He stood as he noticed her watching him, and she took in his full height, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the western sky. His eyes were a startling blue against his weathered face, and a mop of sandy brown hair fell across his forehead. "Where am I?" she whispered, her throat painfully dry. "My place," he answered simply. "Name's Keegan Crawford. I own the ranch just outside of town." He approached with a cup of water, helping her to sit up just enough to drink. "And you must be Katherine Andrews, I reckon, the mail-order bride come to marry Thomas Blackburn." The water revived her slightly, and with it came the rush of humiliation. "Yes," she admitted, cheeks burning with shame. I'm sorry for the trouble. I hadn't eaten, I figured as much," Keegan interrupted, his voice softer now. "Stage was 3 days late. Thomas got tired of waiting and rode out to his claim yesterday. Said if his bride showed up, someone should tell her he'd be back in a week or so." Fresh panic surged through Katherine. A week! The little strength she'd regained seemed to drain away. "But I have nowhere to stay and my funds are gone, I'd wager," Keegan finished for her again, returning to the fireplace. "Highwaymen hit that stage line twice this month. Sheriff's about useless against them." He ladled something into a bowl. "But that's a worry for later. Right now, you need to eat." The rich beef stew he brought her was the most delicious thing Katherine had ever tasted, or perhaps it was just her desperate hunger making it seem so. She had to force herself to eat slowly, knowing that too much too quickly would make her ill. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished, already feeling strength returning to her limbs. "I don't know how I'll repay your kindness, Mr. Crawford, but—" "Keegan," he corrected. "And there's nothing to repay. Anyone with a speck of decency would do the same." But as Katherine would soon learn, decency was a rare commodity in Concordia, Montana territory. The following morning, after a night spent on Keegan's small sofa while she took his bed despite her protests, Katherine insisted on going into town to find Thomas Blackburn's home. She couldn't impose on a stranger's hospitality any longer than necessary, no matter how kind he had been. "I'll ride with you," Keegan said, saddling his chestnut mare. "Blackburn's place isn't much to speak of. Might need some tending before you settle in." The journey into Concordia was short, less than 2 miles from Keegan's modest ranch. The town itself was smaller than Katherine had imagined, a single dusty street lined with the essential businesses of frontier life. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, small church, and a handful of houses scattered about the periphery. "Thomas's place is on the far end," Keegan explained, helping her down from his horse. Past the livery stable. Several curious stares followed them as they walked the length of the main street. Katherine was acutely aware of her rumpled traveling clothes and disheveled appearance after her ordeal. "Crawford," a stern voice called out. A middle-aged man with a sheriff's badge stepped from the saloon. "This the bride that fainted yesterday, Sheriff Daniels," Keegan nodded curtly. "Miss Andrews is looking for Blackburn's place." The sheriff's gaze traveled over Katherine in a way that made her skin crawl. "Blackburn ain't back yet. Could be another 10 days from what I heard." "A week," Katherine corrected quietly. "Mr. Crawford said a week, did he now?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Well, seems our local rancher knows more about Blackburn's business than Blackburn's own friends. Interesting." Keegan's jaw tightened. "Just helping a lady in need, Sheriff. Nothing interesting about common decency." The sheriff adjusted his gun belt. "Miss Andrews, there's a boarding house 2 doors down. Mrs. Wilson charges a fair rate, though she expects payment up front." Katherine hesitated, the embarrassment of her financial situation washing over her again. "I'll inquire, thank you." As they walked away, Keegan leaned closer. "Sheriff doesn't much care for me," he explained in a low voice. "I've spoken against his methods a time or two at town meetings." "His methods?" "He collects more than just taxes from some businesses. Looks the other way when certain folks break the law." Keegan's expression was grim. "Concordia has its share of troubles, like any frontier town." Blackburn's cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a shack. A single room with a dirt floor, a rusting stove, and a narrow bed frame with no mattress. The roof had a visible hole, and the only window was covered with oilskin rather than glass. Katherine's heart sank as she stood in the doorway. This was to be her marital home. The man she had corresponded with for 6 months had described a comfortable dwelling with modern conveniences. There wasn't even a water pump. She began, then fell silent, unsure what to say. Keegan's eyes were sympathetic. "Blackburn's been promising to fix this place up for 2 years. He spends more time prospecting and drinking than building." "I see." Katherine swallowed hard, forcing back tears. She would not cry in front of this man who had already seen her at her weakest. "Miss Andrews," Keegan said gently, "you can't stay here, not like this." "I have little choice, Mr. Crawford. My intended has paid for my passage. I'm obligated." Keegan's expression hardened. "No woman is obligated to live in squalor, bride agreement or not." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I have a proposal. My ranch needs tending, cooking, cleaning, mending, things I have little time for while working the land. Stay there until Blackburn returns, earn your keep, and decide then what you wish to do." "But it wouldn't be proper. I'll sleep in the barn," he said firmly. "Your reputation will remain intact, and you'll have food and shelter while you consider your options." Katherine wanted to refuse. All her life, she'd been raised to be independent, to make her own way. It was why she'd agreed to become a mail-order bride after her parents' deaths left her penniless. But the memory of hunger pains and the sight of the dismal cabin before her made the decision clear. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Crawford." "Keegan," he reminded her with the first smile she'd seen on his face, a transformation that made her breath catch unexpectedly. "Keegan," she repeated. And somehow, in that moment, Katherine felt that perhaps her journey west hadn't been a terrible mistake after all. The week that followed established a rhythm between them. Katherine rose early, preparing breakfast before Keegan headed out to work with his small herd of cattle. She spent her days cleaning his modest cabin, mending clothes, and tending to the vegetative garden behind the house. By late afternoon, she would begin preparing supper, which they shared as Keegan recounted his day. For his part, Keegan was scrupulously respectful of her space, true to his word about sleeping in the barn despite her protests that he shouldn't be exiled from his own home. Each morning, he'd knock before entering, waiting for her permission even though it was his cabin. On the third day, he returned mid-morning with a bolt of blue calico fabric and a set of sewing needles. "Noticed your dress is wearing thin," he said gruffly, laying the items on the table. "Thought you might want to make something new." Katherine ran her fingers over the soft fabric, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "This is too generous. I can't accept." "You can and you will," he interrupted, a flush creeping up his neck. "Consider it payment for how you've fixed up this place. Hasn't been this clean since, well, ever." That evening, as she sat by the fireplace cutting pattern pieces, Katherine found herself studying Keegan as he cleaned his rifle. There was a gentleness to his movements that belied his rugged exterior. In their conversations, she'd learned he'd come west after the war between the states, seeking peace after 4 years of fighting. Unlike many men she'd encountered, he spoke respectfully of the indigenous peoples whose land this had once been, and he treated her as an equal, valuing her opinions and thoughts. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured. He glanced up, those blue eyes catching the firelight. "You may ask." "Can't promise I'll answer." "Why aren't you married, a man with land with your kindness? It seems unusual out here." Keegan set the rifle aside, his expression thoughtful. "Was engaged once back in '68. Sarah was her name. Fever took her before the wedding." He paused, gazing into the flames. "After that, well, never seemed right to look for someone else. This land keeps me busy enough." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. He shrugged. "Life out here is hard. You learn to keep moving forward." His eyes met hers. "What about you? What brings a clearly educated woman to be a mail-order bride in Montana?" Katherine's hands stilled on the fabric. "My parents died last winter. Influenza. The bank took our home for debts I didn't know existed. Teaching positions were filled, and a woman alone has few respectable options." She smiled ruefully. Mr. Blackburn's letters painted a promising picture of life here, a fresh start. "And now I'm not certain what to think," she admitted. "The reality is different than I expected." Keegan nodded slowly. "The West has a way of stripping away illusions. Shows you who you really are underneath." "And who am I, do you think?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His gaze was steady, assessing. "Stronger than you know," he said finally. "Brave enough to cross a continent on a promise, smart enough to adapt when that promise falls short." That night, lying in Keegan's bed while he slept in the barn, Katherine wondered what Thomas Blackburn would be like when he returned. Would he be disappointed in her? Would she be disappointed in him? And why did the thought of leaving Keegan's cabin fill her with such unexpected sadness? On the 5th day, Sheriff Daniels rode out to the ranch while Keegan was checking fence lines in the north pasture. Katherine was hanging laundry when the lawman approached. "Miss Andrews," he called, dismounting with a predatory smile. "Settling in nicely with Crawford, I see." Katherine straightened, instantly wary. "Mr. Crawford has kindly offered shelter until my fiancée returns. Nothing improper is occurring, Sheriff." Of course. He removed his hat, revealing thinning hair plastered to his scalp with sweat. "Just doing my duty, checking on a lady's welfare." Though I wonder what Blackburn will think when he hears his bride-to-be has been playing house with another man." "I am not playing house," Katherine replied coldly. "I'm earning my keep through honest work." The sheriff stepped closer, invading her space. "There are other ways a woman can earn her keep in these parts, more profitable ways, especially for a pretty thing like you." Katherine backed away, heart pounding. "I think you should leave, Sheriff." "Should I?" He reached out, fingering the sleeve of her new blue dress. "That's Crawford's fabric, isn't it? Man doesn't give gifts without expecting something in return." "Step away from her, Daniels." Keegan's voice cut through the air like a whip. He stood at the edge of the yard, rifle in hand, expression thunderous. The sheriff turned slowly, his hand dropping to his pistol. "Just having a friendly conversation, Crawford. No law against that." "There's laws against harassment," Keegan replied, walking forward steadily. "And trespassing." "You're doing both." Tension crackled between the men as they faced each other, neither willing to back down. Katherine held her breath, terrified of what might happen. "You're awful protective of another man's bride," the sheriff said, his voice dangerously soft. "Makes a person wonder why." "I protect anyone being threatened on my land," Keegan answered evenly. "Now mount up and ride out." For a moment, Katherine thought the sheriff might draw his weapon, but finally he stepped back with a humorless laugh. "This isn't finished, Crawford, not by a long shot." He turned to Katherine. "And you, Miss Andrews, you might want to reconsider your accommodations. Wouldn't want Blackburn getting the wrong idea when he returns. Tomorrow." The words hung in the air as he mounted his horse and rode away. Tomorrow. Thomas Blackburn was returning tomorrow, a full 3 days earlier than expected. "Are you all right?" Keegan asked, setting his rifle down and approaching her with concern etched on his face. Katherine nodded, though she felt far from all right. "He said Thomas is coming back tomorrow. I heard." Keegan's expression was unreadable. "We should get you into town then. Make sure you're at his cabin when he arrives." "Yes," she agreed, though the word felt hollow in her mouth. "I should prepare my things." They worked in silence for the rest of the day, a new awkwardness between them. Katherine packed her few belongings, including the blue dress Keegan had gifted her. When supper was ready, they ate with little conversation, the impending separation weighing heavily on both. "Thank you," Katherine said finally, breaking the silence, "for everything you've done." Keegan nodded, his eyes not meeting hers. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't. You're a good man, Keegan Crawford." He looked up then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Katherine," he began, then stopped himself. "I hope Blackburn deserves you." The words he didn't say hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Morning came too quickly. Keegan hitched his wagon to take Katherine and her trunk to Blackburn's cabin. The journey into town was painfully quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Concordia, they saw a commotion near the saloon. A crowd had gathered, and the sheriff's voice could be heard shouting orders. "Wait here," Keegan said, pulling the wagon to a stop and jumping down. He returned minutes later, his expression grim. "There was a shooting last night at Elk Creek. Thomas Blackburn was involved." Katherine's heart lurched. "Is he?" "He's alive," Keegan assured her quickly, "but he's injured. They've taken him to Doc Wilson's place." Without discussion, they redirected to the doctor's small house at the edge of town. Inside, they found Thomas Blackburn conscious but pale, his right shoulder heavily bandaged. Katherine barely recognized him from the small daguerreotype he'd sent her. In person, Thomas was older than his picture suggested, at least 45 to 22, with a florid face that spoke of too much whiskey and too little fresh air. "You must be my bride," he slurred when he saw her, eyes glassy from pain medication. "Prettier in your picture." "Good, good." "Mr. Blackburn," she acknowledged with a nod. "I'm sorry to find you injured." The doctor, a harried-looking man with spectacles, pulled them aside. "He'll recover, but he won't be using that arm for at least a month. Bullets shattered the bone. He'll need care." "What happened?" Keegan asked. "Gambling dispute," the doctor replied with a sigh. "Claims the other fellow cheated. Sheriff says Blackburn drew first." Katherine felt dizzy again, but not from hunger this time. This was the man she'd agreed to marry, a drunkard who engaged in shootouts over card games. "Miss Andrews," Thomas called from the bed, his voice stronger. "We should get the preacher. Get married today. Need a woman to tend me while I heal." The presumption in his tone, the expectation that she would simply obey, made something hard and determined settle in Katherine's chest. "Mr. Blackburn, I believe we should postpone any discussion of marriage until you've recovered." His bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Paid for you to come out here, didn't I? That makes you mine." "It makes me nothing of the sort," Katherine replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your letters described a very different situation than what I've found. I believe we both need time to reconsider." Thomas struggled to sit up, wincing in pain. "Now you listen here." The lady's made her position clear, Keegan interrupted, stepping forward. "And you're in no condition for this conversation." "This ain't your business, Crawford," Thomas spat. "Everyone knows you've been keeping her at your place, probably ruined her already." Katherine felt heat rush to her face. "Mr. Blackburn, how dare you impugn my character?" "Impugn your," Thomas spluttered. "Listen to her fancy talk. Think you're too good for me, do you, after I spent good money bringing you here?" "I believe this concludes our acquaintance," Katherine said coldly, turning away. "Good day, Mr. Blackburn. I wish you a swift recovery." Outside, Katherine struggled to maintain her composure, humiliation and anger warring within her. "I've been such a fool," she whispered. "Those letters, they were nothing but lies." "Not a fool," Keegan said gently. "Just someone who took a chance on a better life. There's courage in that." "What do I do now?" The reality of her situation crashed down on her. "I have no money for passage home, no place to stay, no prospects." Keegan was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "You could stay," he said finally. "Not with me, that wouldn't be proper. But Concordia needs a school teacher. Children here grow up barely knowing their letters. Someone with your education would be valued." "A teacher," hope flickered within her. "But where would I live? The room above the general store is vacant, belongs to the Hansons' good people. I'm sure they'd rent it to you. Maybe take payment in tutoring for their children until you get established." The possibility of building a life here, a life of her own choosing rather than as someone's mail-order bride, was suddenly, tantalizingly real. "I could do that," she said slowly, a smile forming. "I could really do that." Keegan's answering smile transformed his face again, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Yes, you could." For the next month, Katherine established herself in Concordia. The Hansons were indeed willing to rent her the room above their store in exchange for teaching their 3 children. Word spread quickly, and soon she had a small class meeting in the back room of the church, 3 days a week. Parents paid what they could, sometimes in coins, more often in eggs or meat or mended clothing. Keegan kept his distance, respecting her need to establish herself independently, but their paths crossed frequently in the small community. Each encounter left her more certain of the growing feelings she harbored for him, feelings that had begun that first day when she awoke to find him cooking for her after her collapse. Thomas Blackburn made a point of avoiding her, having found another potential bride through correspondence before his arm was fully healed. Katherine felt nothing but relief at his obvious disdain. As autumn approached, bringing cooler air to the Montana territory, Katherine found herself walking along the creek that bordered Keegan's property one Sunday afternoon. She hadn't planned to venture so far, but the beautiful weather and her own restless thoughts had carried her farther than intended. "Miss Andrews," Keegan's voice startled her from her reverie. He approached on horseback, surprise evident in his expression. "You're a ways from town." "I needed to clear my head," she explained, smiling up at him. The weather was too beautiful to resist. He dismounted, leading his horse by the reins as he fell into step beside her. "Your school is doing well, I hear. Mrs. Hanson says her youngest is reading already." "Emily is a quick study," Katherine agreed, pleased by his interest. "All the children are making progress." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the babbling creek and the soft footfalls of Keegan's horse behind them. "Katherine," he said finally, using her given name for the first time since she'd moved to town. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes. I've been watching you these past weeks, building a life here, making your own way." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, and the kindest." Katherine felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Keegan, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know you came here expecting one life and found another. I know you're just getting your feet under you, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." He took a deep breath, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "I love you, Katherine Andrews. I think I've loved you since I found you collapsed in the street and carried you home. I love your determination, your intelligence, your compassion. I don't want to rush you or pressure you, but I needed you to know." Katherine's vision blurred with sudden tears. "Oh, Keegan," she whispered, "I've been half in love with you since I opened my eyes in your cabin. I just never dreamed you might feel the same." His face lit with wonder as he reached for her hands. "Is that true?" "Completely true," she confirmed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "You showed me kindness when I was at my lowest point. You respected my independence when I needed to find my way. How could I not love you for that?" Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, Keegan leaned down to kiss her. His lips were gentle against hers, the contact brief but filled with promise. "I don't have much," he said when they parted. "Just the ranch, 100 head of cattle and hands that know how to work, but everything I have is yours if you want it." Katherine smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "What I want is you, Keegan Crawford, a life built together, side by side." The winter of 1876-1877 was one of the harshest in memory for the Montana Territory. Blizzards piled snow higher than doorways, and temperatures plunged to deadly lows. But inside the Crawford ranch house, expanded now with a proper kitchen and a second bedroom, Katherine and Keegan weathered the season in newlywed bliss. They had married in October, a small ceremony in the Concordia Church with the whole town in attendance. Katherine continued teaching 3 days a week, riding to town on Sunbeam, the gentle mare Keegan had given her as a wedding gift. The other days, she worked alongside her husband on their growing ranch, learning the business of cattle raising with the same determination she brought to everything. By spring, when the last snow finally melted and the first wildflowers pushed through the warming earth, Katherine had news of her own to share. "A baby," Keegan whispered in awe when she told him, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Due in November," she confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "Just in time for our first anniversary." Their son, James, was born on a clear November night, healthy and strong with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. As Katherine nursed him before the fireplace, Keegan watching them with naked adoration, she marveled at how different her life was from what she'd imagined when stepping off that stagecoach a year ago. "What are you thinking about?" Keegan asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Hunger," she replied honestly. How desperate I was that day, how close I came to a very different fate. Keegan moved to sit beside her, his arm encircling her shoulders. I thank God every day for bringing you to my door, even in such dire circumstances. As do I, Katherine agreed, leaning against him as their son dozed in her arms. Who would have thought that collapsing from hunger would lead to all this happiness? I knew, Keegan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. From the moment I fed you that first bowl of stew and saw the color return to your cheeks, I knew I would never leave your side again. Katherine smiled, remembering those early days, the careful dance between them as strangers became friends, and friends became something infinitely more precious. And you never did. And I never will, he promised, his voice rough with emotion, not until my dying day. Outside, the Montana wind howled across the prairie, but inside their home, built with love and fortified by shared dreams, Katherine and Keegan Crawford had everything they needed: food on their table, a son in their arms, and a love that had begun with an act of simple human kindness on a dusty street in Concordia. Years passed, and their family grew. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them 2 years after James, followed by twins Robert and William 3 years later. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, expanding to become one of the most successful operations in the county. Katherine's small school grew as well, eventually moving into its own building with her as the head teacher, training new educators to serve the expanding community. Sometimes, when the children were asleep and the night was quiet, Katherine would think about how close she had come to a different life, a life with Thomas Blackburn, who had eventually drunk himself to death in a mining camp, or a life of desperate struggle alone in an unfamiliar land. Instead, hunger had brought her to Keegan's door, and everything had changed with a simple bowl of stew and a man who refused to leave her side. It was, she often thought as she drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, the hungriest and most fortunate day of her life.